we have resistance. We have narratives and stories that keep us resistant. Now, the nervous system has a sensation that's, it's constricting. It feels uncomfortable. So that's the nervous system. But then the resistance is we'll use a story to sort of, we have this feeling. So first we have the story of, oh, I got to do this thing. And then we have the story, oh, but that sounds uncomfortable or hard or whatever. I don't have risk tolerance for it. Then the nervous system feels uncomfortable. Then the nervous system sort of signals, yep, something's wrong. And then we go back to the story and we use confirmation bias to say, yeah, see, I can't do it. Yeah, here's the reason. And we go into the stories of resistance and we stay stuck.
ADHD Rewired, episode 355. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host and I have ADHD. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups. And you can learn all about our intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. You can do all of this at our website, ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Seth Perler from SethPerler.com. Seth is an executive function coach, educator, vlogger, and guy who cares about seeing outside the box kids succeed. He has ADHD and has used his experience to build a successful business, helping students who struggle with homework, grades, procrastination, overwhelm, underachievement, time management, and motivation. For our adults who are listening, it's good news this stuff doesn't go away. These are all related to executive functions. So, first of all, Seth, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks so much for having me. And thank you for what you do, that you made a decision one day to do this crazy project to make this podcast and that you're contributing to so many people's lives through your work. So thank you.
Thanks for saying that. I appreciate that. And you've been doing some pretty influential work as of recently. You just finished up your second executive function online summit. So that, from what I hear, was a really good success. So I would love to first start with a little bit of kind of your story and how you got kind of into ADHD, about kind of what your background is.
Excellent. Yeah. So my story, to sort of start at the beginning, it starts when I was a kid, and I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I didn't know that I had ADHD, and I was not hyperactive, but I was inattentive, and literally, so kindergarten was fine, but literally in my first grade report cards, the comments started, with daydreams and all of that stuff, and it went all the way through the rest of my schooling. Daydreams, does not pay attention, lazy, doesn't try hard enough, needs to work harder, needs to pull himself up by the bootstraps, needs to focus, all of these things I started hearing pretty early. And what happened to me was I really started internalizing these messages, and my two big messages that I internalized was that I'm lazy and I'm a failure. So those were, did you have some of those too, Eric?
Lazy was my official diagnosis when I was a kid. So it's definitely one of those big kind of shame triggering words for me.
Exactly. Yeah. The shaming. Yeah. So what happened to me is those were my two, I sort of latched onto those two words as the narrative that we were talking about before, the story. But those were my story. I'm just a lazy failure, so I can't do it. So why even try? So what happened was, as I sort of internalized those things, I got definitely into middle and high school being like, why even try? This is stupid. I don't need this. Or just, I had full intentions of getting things done, but I never could. So that's sort of the background of my story. I sort of fantasized that somehow I would own an island and have an island where I could live and be a millionaire. But yet I couldn't even get the most basic things done. And I proceeded to get fired from places like the drugstore, the local grocery store, Subway, places and more, but places, the point is, that are hard to get fired from. These are very easy jobs I'm getting fired from, and it has everything to do with ADHD. And then I went to college because I thought I was supposed to. And I actually went into college on probation because my grades were so bad in high school. So I almost failed out of high school. They had this probationary program at Ball State University where you go in the summer. So I didn't even have a summer break after my senior year. I went straight into a probationary program, took 3 classes, and as is my pattern, I did fine on those classes because when things got really hard or heavy or whatever, I always stepped up my game. So I did fine on those 3 classes, went back in the fall for fall semester, proceeded to fail out. By the end of spring, I failed fall semester, failed spring semester, failed out of school altogether, went back to a community college the next year, dropped out before failing out, and then just really was a very hopeless young man. Really felt incapable, didn't know where to start, did feel like a lazy failure, felt like everything I touched turned to shit, and I wasn't going to be able to create anything. And I got more and more hard on myself, and just like, life doesn't matter, things don't matter, everybody's stupid, I hate everybody. And it was really a reflection of how I felt about myself. I really did not like who I was. And finally, not one day, but after a lot of pain, I started to really say, you know what? I really want to give life a shot and really see what happens if I really step it up and really put my everything into it. And sort of serendipitously, things did start to happen and started to change and shift. And I started working with kids, fell in love with it, decided I wanted to be a teacher, went back to college, and probably worked 10 times harder than everybody else in my classes. That may be a bit of hyperbole, but I really had to work much harder than most people when I went back to college. Became a teacher, and as a kid, I struggled with the system. As a teacher, I struggled with the system.
What were some of the struggles that you had as a teacher?
Well, one struggle would be sitting in a staff meeting, listening to a bunch of bullshit that I don't agree with and not feeling like I had a voice to really speak up. And if I did, that I would be shamed even in a setting like that. Trying to speak up or advocate for kids who needed help, but there are a lot of people in the system that don't get these kids still. And also things that I just don't agree with. Like, I think that letter grades are morally wrong. The way we construct classes, and we've decided to make them math, science, social studies, reading and writing, the way we choose to value what we break into subjects. Like, we created this system. It doesn't have to be broken into these subjects. We can do things that are more project-based and meaningful and experiential and weave subjects together. Normal life doesn't have you go to math for 45 minutes, then science for 45 minutes. Our adult lives don't do that. Everything mixes together. And even grade levels. I don't know how old you are, Eric, but you and I are working together today, and we don't really care how old we are. And there are times when it's appropriate for kids of different ages to work together collaboratively, creatively, and things like. So there are many things that I just standardized tests I don't agree with. I think they're pretty horrible. And the more I was in the system and found out about how corporate money makes a lot of decisions, there are people who we don't see that are benefiting and profiting from education, textbook companies, curriculum manufacturers, testing manufacturers, even down to food manufacturers that make the school lunches. These are massive big money corporations that are profiting. They do not want anyone to shake up the boat or the system, or rock the boat rather. They want to meet their financial goals and their expectations. And so I think that that's very corrupted and it interferes with us saying, what do kids really need rather than others? So what we do instead is we say, it's the kids' fault. They're just being lazy or not stepping up or not being motivated or not disciplined enough. And how do we help these kids fit into this system rather than saying, how do we help the system fit the kids, neurodiverse kids?
You know, in the sort of clinical therapy world, that client who is not making the progress that we want them to make, well, they're just treatment resistant, which I just think is a bunch of bullshit. That's just like, it's because you haven't figured out like what's really connecting with that person. In my humble opinion, because, you know, it's easy to put the blame on somebody else. But when you're looking at a whole system, like you're describing, that's, you know, it's hard when people don't get it. And it's interesting. You know, I've worked with many people with ADHD, and I find there's a not with every adult with ADHD, but a common trait that I see, which I kind of like as just a general part of our community, is this sort of inability to accept bullshit in systems. Like, it's almost sad where it's like, I wish I can tolerate more of the bullshit, because if I can just like plug my nose a little bit and get into that system for a little bit, maybe I can have a more like create more change. But when I was an intern, when I was a grad student, I got fired from my first internship because I was advocating for a student, and that wasn't my role, apparently, even though I was directly told to go do that. So it's, you know, it taught me, I'm like, all right, well, you know, I can't even imagine being a teacher in a school. I mean, teachers are, school is a teacher's home. As a social worker, I'm sort of like a guest in the school. And, yeah, it's a lot of BS. And the, you know, whenever I present to schools, to teachers, the one thing that, you know, I really try to emphasize, and I get kind of emotional when I'm talking about it, is how important it is for us to understand the kids that we're working with, you know, because I do the work that I do, and I'm passionate about it in the way I am because I was not understood as a kid. And I imagine that you were kind of the same way.
Yeah, I did not. And there were some teachers that did understand me, or even if they didn't, they showed so much care and concern. And, you know, we hopefully do have a handful of teachers that really invested in us. But my most memorable teacher was one that really did not get me, shamed me a lot. I mean, I can remember to this day how it made me feel. You know, and I just felt like I couldn't do anything right in that class. I never would be able to. Like, I just could always tell. And at that age, I was very innocent, so I didn't always see it coming. It took that school year for me to finally get cynical and be like, okay, I really can do no right. But for months, you know, I just like did my best, you know, and inevitably I would innocently be like, okay, this day's going fine. And then I would get in trouble for something, you know? So yeah, I really did not feel very seen or understood.
So you're working in a school, and then
12 years. Yep.
Okay. And then you were asked to do an ADHD rating scale for one of your students.
Yeah. So I was a teacher for 12 years. I worked at a few different schools. I did want to say, too, I think a lot of teachers with ADHD or very creative teachers end up leaving the profession, sadly, very gifted human beings because of the rigidity of the system. 50% of teachers quit by year 5. So our biggest investment in the whole entire world is our kids. And we have an industry that's designed to serve them where 50% of the people who have chosen to dedicate their lives to them quit by year 5. Is that bothersome?
Yeah, it should be, right? Yeah, no, I mean, I've always thought that we don't pay teachers enough and invest in them enough. And, you know, I've been facilitating e-learning with my son. You know, he's doing the hybrid model. So watching his teacher, who is simultaneously teaching to kids on Zoom and to her classroom at the same time, I'm just like, oh my God. Like I don't know how any teacher is not just going home and like drinking a massive amount of alcohol. Like
they probably are, because it's insane. It's a recipe for failure. We're just not setting. It's just not a good situation. It's not the teacher's fault. So I'm teaching and I had to do an ADHD rating scale for one of my students, and I'm filling out this paperwork and I'm reading it. And I'm like, oh my God, that's me. That's me. That's me. That's me. That's me. And I asked the school psychologist if I could take the test myself, just not telling anybody. Could she let me do that? And I did it. And I actually sent a copy to my parents, had them do it and send it to me, and went over it with her. And sure enough, I'm classic. And then I started going down the rabbit hole of really trying to understand these different types of ADHD and these different symptoms. And, in the DSM, it talks about these 18 big markers. And I think you're supposed to have 6 of them per period of time that interfere with your life. And I was like, this has interfered with my entire life. So I started specializing and helping people who were the most like me at that age and teaching these things. And I'm absolutely in love with executive function and ADHD in the brain, and helping people figure out how awesome they are and how to work with these things. Because we have the challenge is real.
Let's do this. There's a whole lot more to your story. I know you talked to me about you had SARS in 2000, which is, I'd like to just find out a little bit more about that and how it relates to now, kind of what you learned about that. But we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about mindfulness and the nervous system, talking about resistance and risk tolerance, and probably some other stuff that we'll find along the way. So we will be right back. Last week, we let you know that the winter sessions for ADHD reWired's award-winning coaching and accountability groups were full. But then, right? So a bunch of you are not going to be able to join us this winter, unless we do something crazy like start a third section. I don't know if we'll do that. Barb's private messaging me telling me we should do a third section. We'll see. So we were crazy enough to start a third section. 6 people, bright and early at 6 a.m. Pacific, with our latest podcaster and coach, Moira Mabin. So we communicated with all of you who joined, shuffled some individuals around to where they wanted to be. The dream ends with 2 spots left in section 1 and 1 spot left in section 2. So for those of you who have been listening to this podcast for a while and keep thinking you're going to join, and maybe you need that added pressure to get that registration step done as soon as possible, I am talking to you. Consider this your second chance. Go to coachingrewired.com and click on the red button to receive an email with instructions on how to submit your name and possibly secure a spot for this winter's coaching and accountability groups. If you are new to the podcast, welcome to ADHD reWired. Since 2014, community has been at the core of what ADHD reWired is. And a huge part of our community is our coaching community, which includes our 10-week intensive coaching and accountability groups and our alumni membership community, where coaching group alumni continue to get support once their coaching group ends. If you can't make the winter sessions, the spring sessions are April 7th through June 18th. Registration is by invitation only. So if you want to make sure that you get invited when a registration opens, go to coachingrewired.com and click on the green button. You will get information on how to attend our invitation registration only events this March. To learn more, go to coachingrewired.com. That's coachingrewired.com. All right, we are back with Seth Perler. All right, so we are here in 2020 in the month, what are we on, 6, 7 of this coronavirus pandemic. you had SARS back in 2000, which was a sort of a similar-ish experience. It just as a contagion. What was your experience with that, and why is it relevant to this conversation?
Yeah, well, I had ARDS, but SARS is severe acute respiratory syndrome. ARDS is, I believe, adult respiratory distress syndrome, but basically they're the same thing with different names. What happened was I was student teaching on the Navajo Indian Reservation, and I got sick. And I didn't know what it was. I was throwing up blood for a couple of days, and then I end up in a coma for 9 days. I wake up. I had been intubated because my lungs were not functioning on their own. So I was on a respirator to keep me alive. And, I come out of this coma, and your body eats itself. Your body atrophies because you can't eat food. So, they do try to put something in you, but your body really starts to eat itself. Anyhow, I come out, I can't stand up, I can't walk, I can't even sit up, I can't go to the bathroom, stand up and go to a bathroom or anything. I don't know what's going on. I'm all drugged up and everything, and my parents are there. And when you're intubated, you can't speak. Anyhow, this was very traumatic for me. And I had to learn how to walk again and all these things. And the trauma, and I for those of you who are not familiar with the trauma world or thinking about trauma, for those of you listening, a lot of people misunderstand trauma, but we all have levels of trauma. But the trauma for me in this situation activated a place in my brain. We have the amygdala, the fight, flight, or freeze. We have places in our brain that help record traumas so that we can know when there's a threat and stay safe. And what happened to me was that I started having anxiety attacks and panic attacks around not being able to breathe, which makes sense because I was suffocating on the fluid in my lungs. I was trying to attack whatever was in me, but was also suffocating me, because when you have fluid in the lungs, which are supposed to exchange gas, you cannot have gas exchange and you die. I did not die. I got very close, but that traumatized me, and I didn't know that. So I start having these things, and about a year or two later, I start seeing a therapist to work with this. And she teaches me Vipassana mindfulness meditation, and she does EMDR, which is a somatic therapy, which means that it's called body-centered. Point is, people who are listening, my body had recorded that there were certain threats. And in my case, it was not being able to breathe. And the story or the narrative in my mind was very hypersensitive to anything where I felt like I couldn't breathe. So one day we were driving to go snow ski in Taos, New Mexico, and I saw a sign that said we were at 10 or 12,000 feet elevation or whatever it said. The second I saw that sign, I had a panic attack. Now, the sign did not cause the panic attack. What I thought about the sign caused the panic attack. My story that, oh my gosh, I'm at a higher elevation, maybe there's not enough oxygen. I'm having all these thoughts in a fraction of a second. Right. I can't even track the thoughts, but my amygdala did. My brain said, we are threatened. We are not safe. Hey, amygdala, get into fight, flight, or freeze so we can protect ourselves. But I'm driving in a van. There's nothing to protect myself from. So the narrative in the story that I talk about, what happened with this stuff and how it's helped me as an adult with ADHD, but also with working with kids, is to understand that we all have narratives and stories in our mind. And the problem is when we pole vault over mouse turds, or we make mountains out of molehills, or we get it out of the correct proportion of how big it should be. And so like me seeing that sign that I'm at 12,000 feet is not a panic attack is not an appropriate response for a metal sign on the side of the road telling me the elevation. But my narrative and story was so hardwired at the time to believe that I was being threatened I started biking, and when I would get out of breath, I would start having panic and anxiety. Anything where I started getting out of breath. So we all have narratives and stories in our mind that are out of proportion. And the problem is when they rule us and dictate us making choices that are bad for us, for our careers, for our relationships, for our romantic relationships, for our relationships with our family, our friends, our work relationships. When we have these stories and we believe them, and you can see this in politics right now, and I'm not going to talk a lot about politics, but you can see the divisiveness. There are very, 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 very different stories, and different sides of the story believe 100% that their side is the right story. So the problem is when these stories are ruling us and we are reacting rather than responding. So what happens is we have a story. If we feel safe or unthreatened, it activates the nervous system to have a nervous system response. Then we have an uncomfortable feeling in the body. So when I work with kids and families and myself, and this is the wounded healer thing that I teach what I needed to learn, when these kids are resistant to doing the things that they need to do for their own well-being in their own life, like getting a good education, even if they don't like all the teachers or all the classes, education is the key that's going to help them in life. And if they think all my teachers hate me, or all teachers are bad, or I hate school, and it's like this catastrophized black and white big picture thought, I hate school, even though there's so much value in it, and even though I'm snarky about it, there is tons of value in education. But to be that black and white, that's the nervous system responding to the story. So the story now is school sucks. And everything about school sucks. That's the story, let's say. And the nervous system responds because there have been experiences where the kid didn't feel safe in school, emotionally, physically, whatever. But the nervous system felt unsafe. Yet you have to sit there in that classroom. You can't just leave, or you might get in trouble and shamed and feel more unsafe, or whatever the situations are. Or you have a bully, and then that person isn't kicked out of school, and you have to see them every day for an entire school year and deal with this emotional abuse that nobody even really sees. It can be very under the radar, but it impacts you anyhow. So we have to look at the nervous system and the story. So we have to look at the story and the narrative and the nervous system and work with those things to learn how to not be ruled by either of them, and thus be able to be ruled by more of the truth, or more of a higher level of thinking, or more of a clarity of thought, or more rational thought, or more logic, or more reason. We want to be ruled by good decisions, by being able to think clearly about the reality of a situation and make better decisions.
I like to think about the idea of let emotion have a seat at the table, but it's not allowed to make the decisions.
Yep. It serves important purposes.
Right. Because
very important. They both do.
It's interesting for, as trained as a clinical social worker, I think in my schooling, I got kind of almost a way of listening. Like I sort of almost dismissed my intuition because I was, so focused on doing evidence-based stuff and I think just as a cognitive sort of ego defense mechanism, I'm a great intellectualizer. I can think the hell out of my feelings, right? And when I learned to sort of step back into my body and listen to that, it's part of the wise mind, but it's a part. You can't let a strong emotion run the show, because that's when we do that, we tend to create what was the expression you used?
Pole vaulting over mouse turds.
Yeah, I guess we create then just big piles of mouse turds. I don't know. It's big shit storms, right? Like when they don't need to be. But because part of, the ADHD sort of picture for many of us with ADHD are those sort of stronger emotions, and learning how to, it's really important that you've had this experience of like identifying, my amygdala is having this experience. It's trying to actually be helpful, but it's actually not helping me. And to sort of weed that out or parse that out and look at it in a more logical way.
Yeah. And really for the listeners who haven't gone down this rabbit hole, and I hope you're still listening, but for those of you that may not have gone down this rabbit hole, being a man in the United States of America, we are not, and it's the same for women too, but I my opinion is it's probably a little stronger for men to be told, do not feel. That is weak. That is not okay. That is not acceptable. Stuff your feelings. Don't feel. So when Eric and I are talking about the body, this somatic experience, and I know a little bit about Eric to know this, but we've both gone down that rabbit hole to take time. And this is going to sound so cheesy for any of those of you who have been indoctrinated in the world this way to think this is weak, but it takes time for us to feel our feelings, to honor our bodies. Please do not turn off your podcast when you hear me say that. This is not woo-woo. This is not cheesy. This is reality. We have ignored our bodies and the sensations that are giving us cues about things, and we are not in touch with that. And as a man, I am absolutely positively more masculine, adult, strong, grounded, better service to other human beings, whatever in life, because I have learned to listen to what's going on in my body and my nervous system. And it has taken a long time. I did a 10-day silent meditation retreat a couple years ago of Vipassana, where you don't talk to you don't even look people in the eye. You don't hold doors open for people. You just pretend like no one's there, and you meditate for 10 days, eat a little bit of food, sleep, and that's it. And now, I had been doing mindfulness practices for many years, so I loved it. After about 7 days, I was sick of it, but I can feel what's going on such deeper levels than I ever could, but it helps me navigate life. Again, rather than being ruled by it, rather than it dictating the choices, my emotions dictating my choices, my thoughts dictating my choices. Now I'm able to have a pause button, notice what's going on, question it, get the reality of the situation, and make a better choice.
I've always loved the idea of a 10-day silent retreat. When I've talked to other people about doing something like that, they're like, why don't you start with a 1-day retreat? How did you start?
Well, I mean, I started because I had that therapist after the coma when I was having all the anxiety, and she was teaching me how to do this. And she told me to get a book by someone named Thich Nhat Hanh, who died a couple years ago, called The Miracle of Mindfulness. And I'm reading this book. I remember there's like a famous chapter about washing the dishes. And on the one hand, it seems so basic. And on the other hand, it was so mind-blowing about presence and being present with whatever you're doing. So that's kind of how I got started, was with Thich Nhat Hanh. And then I live in Boulder, Colorado. So I went to the Shambhala Center where you can meditate, and I took meditation classes, yoga. I've done so many things here in Boulder. This place is just a mecca for things like that, and just started learning all this stuff. But it's so simple, but you don't realize how simple it is until after you've done it for a couple years. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I will say one nuance that I think is valuable for anybody listening. So if you start meditating and doing mindfulness meditation and you have ADHD, one of the biggest excuses with people with ADHD that they like to use this story or narrative as an excuse to not meditate is they say, I can't stop thinking, therefore I can't meditate. Whoever said you have to stop thinking? That's not what this is about. So that's just a big excuse. So you can drop that right now. And now I want to challenge you to meditate. And the other thing is to start small. A minute a day, 3 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day, not an hour a day. That's not what we're talking about here. Start with a minute. And then you can use any app or video or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Just do something. But here's the nuance. I've seen a lot of people in the pseudo spiritual world of Boulder, Colorado, or Sedona, or Los Angeles, all of those. And I've seen a lot of people, there's a term called spiritual bypassing. And that's where people seem to be doing all the spiritual work, but we can seem like we're doing spiritual work, but really avoid doing the real work. The real work. What is it? What the heck does that mean? Well, You can meditate to relax your nervous system and relax your body. That is a way to meditate. And people can do that for years or decades, and you can have great results from that. But what I found for me that really shifted my thinking, my nervous system, and my improved my executive function in ADHD, but really got me through the panic attack and anxiety attacks, because I do not live with that anymore at all, and I didn't use medication for it. So the nuance here that I want to leave you with is this. When we meditate or just be in stillness, you can use the term stillness, we're not trying to not think. It's about watching the thoughts or the feelings or the emotions or the body sensations, whatever is there, and watching it with curiosity, without judgment, being the observer and noticing it and just saying, wow, Seth, that's interesting. You were thinking about that person you drove by that honked at you, and then you flipped them off, and you're thinking about how you hope they die. That's not a cool thought, but that's interesting. But not beating myself. I don't really have that dark of thoughts at this time in my life. But I do I definitely get judgmental of people and stuff and myself, but to watch it and just be like, wow, Seth, that's interesting, and let it play itself out rather than trying to not think it or not feel it or just relax through meditation. To me, Eric, that's where the magic happens, is through really noticing it and not beating myself up and just being like, oh, that's a thought. I don't have to act on it. It's just a thought, but it's interesting. What's that thought about? I'm curious. I'm not judgmental. I'm interested. Oh, that's a feeling. Oh, I just thought about this thing with my fourth grade teacher, and I just felt this weird sensation in the pit of my stomach. What's that? And notice the stomach. And so it's really about, it's not that complicated. You just notice whatever comes up and let it do its thing. And what happens is the stuff that we've held onto that drives us in the periphery that we don't even see, and that controls us. And we start to be able to see, wow, that's been influencing me for years. Oh my God, I don't need to act on that now. We still do. Our initial reaction is always the first reaction. It's just that the reaction is not as loud as it used to be. It's not as powerful as it used to be. And the pause after the initial reaction gets increased so that we can thus have a second reaction where we can mindfully, that's where mindfulness comes from, mindfully make a better choice rather than mindlessly.
So it sounds like you have been doing this for a while, and would it be fair to say this wasn't always the state of your mind? Dude,
yes. So I don't tell, I'll say something that I really never say to my own audience, because this is an audience of adults, but I was suicidal at 12 or 13 years old. I hated myself. I hated myself. And I was that way. I was suicidal until I was 21 or 22. I was stuck. I was hopeless. I was depressed. I was diagnosed bipolar. I don't know if that was a true diagnosis or not, but I hated life. I hated me. I was dysregulated. I couldn't sleep. I wasn't eating well. I lived on Doritos, Coke, and McDonald's, and I didn't take care of myself. But life felt bad. I hated me, and I couldn't get away from me.
So you started
That's a dark place.
Yeah,
and I can't even describe how dark it was. But for those of you who've been there or who are there, it's dark. I am no longer there.
So mindfulness being a big part of that journey away from that place, a really significant traumatic near-death experience, it's a lot of these things that give us perspective. And I think that for many of us, especially those who are in helping professions, I think the ones who are often really good at sort of the arts of the profession are the ones that come from it from a place of they've been through some shit.
I very much like how you use the word art with that, because it's an art. Yeah. Yeah, and they're the wounded healer. They're teaching what they needed most to learn, and that helps them with their craft.
I always tell the members of my coaching groups that what I'm doing right here in this very moment, working with you, is the best thing that I do for managing my own ADHD, because I have to be thinking about it all the time. All right. Let's take one more quick break, and when we come back, I want to talk to you sort of about the ideation and execution of your telesummit, because you kind of rolled it out like pretty quickly, and it was really successful. So for us, especially for our entrepreneurs who are listening, I know we have a lot of business owners out there. I think this will be interesting. So we will be right back. Did you know that listeners like you can support this podcast by becoming a patron? Just go to ADHDrewired.com and click on that Patreon tab at the top of the page. I think some of you have been feeling the spirit of the holidays. I want to welcome 6 new patrons to ADHD Rewired. Thank you so much to Vicky G at the $5 a month level, Mary P and Wayne H at the $10 a month level, Christy F, Javier A, and CA at the $25 a month level. Thank you so much for your generous support. Thanks and happy holidays to all of our new and longtime patrons who help support me and my team. Whatever you can give, I appreciate it. And when you support ADHD Rewired on Patreon, you get cool perks starting at just $5 a month. All of our $25 a month patrons can join me for a group coaching call on Tuesday, December 22nd at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. We do these every 4th Tuesday of the month. And if you can give it just a $10 a month level, you can have access to the recordings of those Patreon coaching calls, plus a bunch of extra content. And would you pay just $5 a month if you can get ad-free episodes of ADHD Rewired? If so, there is a poll on my Patreon page at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. Go vote. We have until the end of the year before we make that final decision. I am leaning towards doing it, but it would be great to see a final push on how many of you would actually love to listen to this podcast and not these ads. And you can do that at $5 a month if we have enough of you that vote to let me know that you would be supporting ADHD Rewired for $5 a month for ad-free episodes. If you find value in this podcast, in the community, and everything else we do, and you're able to, become a patron. All of your support is appreciated. To become a patron, go to ADHDrewired.com and click Patreon at the top of the page. That's ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. And thanks. If you are new to ADHD Rewired, welcome. I want to let you know about our other podcasts that we have on the ADHD Rewired podcast network. If you're looking for a 15-minute podcast full of dry humor, a bunch of tips, a few dad jokes, check out Hacking Your ADHD with Will Curb. This week, he drops a podcast with the top 10 ADHD tips to help manage your ADHD. That's hackingYourADHD.com. And for conversations like this with a focus on kids, check out ADHD Essentials with Brendan Mahan. And coming in 2021, be on the lookout for ADHD Diversified with MJ Siemens and the ADHD Friendly Lifestyle with Moira Maben. Come join me and our growing podcast family for the first live Q&A of 2021. The next live Q&A will be on January 12th at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. And if you are listening to this after that, we do this every second Tuesday of the month at the same time. To register for our live Q&A, go to ADHDrewired.com/events. And to everyone who has applied for our Facebook community in the last several months, we still have not forgotten about you. We made actually a lot of progress on processing your application, so we appreciate your patience. If you want to join our secret Facebook community, it will be worth the wait. Go to ADHDrewired.com/community, and we are still aiming to get everyone in the community by the end of this year. It might even be this week. So be on the lookout for that if you've been waiting to hear from us. And for those of you who listen to audiobooks on Audible, you can now listen to ADHD Rewired there too. If you would be willing to, if you already left a review on Apple Podcasts, thank you. If you'd be willing to leave one on Audible, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much for doing that. and for supporting ADHD reWired. All right, we are back. Now, before we jump into talking about your telesummit, I know that before that on the last break, I said when we come back, we would talk about resistance and risk tolerance. Maybe this is part of this conversation. We can certainly weave it in if it wasn't originally.
Absolutely. So, yeah. So I work with these families. I work day in, day out with complicated kids, usually middle, high school and college kids who are resistant. So I say that any teacher or coach or therapist or tutor or anything that's trying to help a kid, but this applies to adults too, that does not address the resistance is missing half the boat there. So we can't just give someone strategies and tips and tricks. You have to deal with the resistance that inevitably comes up. I don't feel like it. I don't want it. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it in 5 minutes. Procrastination. This is stupid. I can't. It's too hard. I'll never, whatever. We have resistance. We have narratives and stories that keep us resistant. Now, the nervous system has a sensation that's, it's constricting. It feels uncomfortable. So that's the nervous system. But then the resistance is we'll use a story to we have this feeling. So first we have the story of, oh, I got to do this thing. And then we have the story, oh, but that sounds uncomfortable or hard or whatever. I don't have risk tolerance for it. Then the nervous system feels uncomfortable. Then the nervous system sort of signals, yep, something's wrong. And then we go back to the story and we use confirmation bias to say, yeah, see, I can't do it. Yeah, here's the reason. And we go into the stories of resistance and we stay stuck. And with my summit that I did recently, if anyone wants to look at it, it's called the Executive Function Online Summit. It's called executivefunctionsummit.com. But I wanted to make a summit a couple years ago. But I really don't care if you're talking about the summit, about Eric's podcast, about my YouTube channel, about my business, about this or that. If you have ADHD and you're an entrepreneur or you wish you were, first of all, you can do it. I guarantee you, if I can do it, anyone can do it. And I bet you, Eric, would you say the same about yourself?
Yeah, it's, I think there are people who they sort of know that they need this external structure. I still, and part of a big part of what I do and have created in my own business is I've created external structure. But I also know that I'm proudly unemployable. So I do best, working for myself.
Yeah. Brian Clark, a guy that I know who started Copy Blogger, has a site called Unemployable, which I love that concept because I feel like I'm unemployable too, and I will never work for anybody again in my life. Mm. You could pay me enough, but it would be a lot. So anyhow, I really didn't. When I was a teacher, I felt like I want to quit teaching, start my thing, but I don't have anything to fall back on. Mm-hmm. And I am now at a point where, I started in 2010 my business and I just did this summit. It's my second year of it. And it was so successful that I have other people who are running summits who are emailing me saying, how did you do this? How did you do that? Who was your Facebook ads person? I'm like, we didn't have a Facebook ads person. I made a Facebook ad that did very, very, very well because I focused on what people needed. I didn't do anything sleazy, anything salesy, anything markety, anything weird, anything manipulative, the whole summit. So what's ironic is this thing was so successful on so many levels that entrepreneurs are reaching out to me, and it was so successful without doing any markety stuff. And if you are an entrepreneur and you don't follow Seth Godin, I really want you to follow Seth Godin because he was a big inspiration for me in terms of I don't need to listen to these messages I've been brought up with that you have to do markety stuff. So anyhow, risk tolerance means that I'm willing to fail. I'm willing to take a risk. I'm not attached to the outcome, or maybe I am, but I'm okay with being attached to the outcome and having emotions around it and working through that. But risk tolerance is, we get stuck in our resistance. That is not risk tolerance. That is risk avoidance. When we have our narrative and our story and we're resistant and we don't take action. And what we need to do if we want to be successful in anything is figure out how to take action even though we're uncomfortable. Every time, Eric, I do something new in business, and I'm guessing this is your way too, when you started your group, when you started your podcast, every time, my first webinar, terrified. My first YouTube video when I press publish, terrified. My first blog when I press publish, terrified. They're going to hate me. People are going to think I'm stupid. I got imposter syndrome. My 50th YouTube video, I'm terrified to hit publish. My first summit. Who am I to have a summit? Who am I not to have a summit? You know, my first client, my first time I made an ad or a photocopy of that first time I did a public talk. So
do you follow Brene Brown's work?
Yeah,
You know, her podcast where she talks about the first fucking time.
No.
Yeah, it's sort of that idea of like a shitty first draft. Like, this is your first fucking time. Like, it's probably gonna not be great, and it's gonna feel really uncomfortable because it's the first fucking time.
And you got to embrace it too. If you do that, you can actually have fun. Like, I tell a lot of people when I'm trying to get people to like make, let's say I'm in a mastermind group and they're like, I want to make YouTube videos. Like, people think that they're supposed to, and this is so good for you ADD people. People think they're supposed to get all their ducks in a row and then do it. No, not me. And probably not Eric too. I literally will like leap. I will be like, okay, I'm going to make a YouTube channel. I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. And then I figure it out. And you know, we're very impatient as ADD people, but like, we figure it out, you know, 50 or 100 episodes later. It's not you get your ducks in a row and then you do it. It's right. Just, and I love that about ADD. I am so creative. I try a million things and half of them fail and half of them don't.
Well, you know, one of the things, and this is kind of good for, I think, listeners to know, you know, they see me with this podcast, you know, it'll be 7 years in March. So 6.5 years right now, nearing 3 million downloads. I've, you know, going on to the 22nd season of my coaching groups, you know, so I have a very successful business around this. Every part of my business I have built, I have been laying down the tracks as the train's been coming, like every single part of it. Like, I didn't know when I started a podcast that this was going to be the thing that was going to like completely transform my business into going from a traditional psychotherapy practice to an online coaching practice, right? Like, when I first started my podcast, it wasn't even going to be an interview show. It was just me sharing ideas, right? And then I stumbled upon an interview and I'm like, oh, this is way more fun because it requires a lot less planning.
And you couldn't have known that it was a lot more fun until you did a bunch of these things.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, I think it's such this idea of risk. Like, we're all taking risks here, right? And like, I've done stuff that hasn't worked, right? Like, there's been a couple of things that I've launched, like, or tried to launch, and like, like the moment it was about to roll out, like, just shit fell apart, and it was just like, oh, well, that's not happening. Okay, moving on, right? Like, understanding what it was about that. Yeah, and I think that for me, and if it is for you this way, the bigger my dreams sort of get, the more uncomfortable spaces I find myself in, because I keep sort of like pushing past with that level of, all right, like, here's my zone of mastery. I've just not taken a big leap outside of it. And I'm having this real big feeling of like, well, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing right now. And then I try to figure out, what do I need to learn so I can figure out what the fuck I'm doing right now? And then I start doing it and I stumble a bit, and then I learn from that stumbling, and then it starts to get more familiar, and I keep going, and I'm like, oh, I'm pretty good at this, right? Like, it just takes time, and it's messy. And I think it's going back to much earlier in the conversation of like, notice the feeling, but don't let the feeling be the director, right? Because if it was, I mean, we wouldn't be talking right now for that.
Yep. Or you would be in it. Yeah. You'll stay stuck in analysis paralysis.
You were talking about some of the stuff that you did when you first started. I probably have shared this before on the podcast. Maybe it's been a long time. The very first webinar that I gave under ADHD reWired, it was this webinar on technology. Right. And I didn't want to get distracted by all the comments and everything in the chat. So I full screen my screen. So I'm just looking at the slides. Except I've never actually finished sharing the slides. So for about 40 minutes, I'm presenting, not seeing any of the comments. And then I end what I thought was ending share screen, but I come back to our webinar platform, and then I look at the chat window. I'm just like, it's amazing. The presentation on technology, I completely screwed up the technology. Mm-hmm. Right. And it was just like, and you know what? Like, did anything really bad happen? No, I kind of showed how to have grace, like in like a really uncomfortable situation, right? Like I screwed up, and one of the things was too that like everyone wanted me to be successful with that, and like they were all sort of there rooting for me, even as they realized I just figured out that, like they were just really glad they weren't me at that moment, which is fine. I'm happy to be that person.
Me too. Yeah. Our inner critic, we can take it either way. We can beat up on ourselves and be like, oh my God, I'm not going to do that again. I'm such a failure, blah, blah, blah. And that story is there for us if we want it. But we can also say, I actually did it. Mm-hmm. And my very first webinar too, I couldn't get the software to work until 5 minutes before it started.
Yeah.
And, it's just like, if you're willing, I could have given up at that point, but if we just keep it, and I just really do want to encourage people. I really mean it when I say, if I can do it, anyone can, because I don't know what I'm doing. Eric doesn't know what the hell he's doing. He's just trying to do good work in the world. And we just put one foot in front of the other. For those of you that are stuck, I guess my heart really goes out to you, because Eric and I have both been stuck. And that's a hard place, but we don't have to continue to let that narrative rule us. I just really want to encourage any of you with those entrepreneurial spirits out there, like just try stuff and don't try to figure it all out. Inevitably, I don't care what you do. You can get all your ducks in a row, do it perfectly, and you will still find out you messed up 50 aspects of it. But then the next time you'll do it better. So I just see so many people stuck, and I've been there, and it's so hard. And then they're like, oh, well, should I do it this way or that way? Should I do podcast or YouTube or this or that? It doesn't matter. And I do want to end with one kind of key thought, if I may. And I don't know where you're at time wise, but
we're at the point where the time timer has no more red in it. And
so we'll wrap up.
Yeah.
I think that something that was really powerful for me is that people get way, way, way too stuck in trying to figure out the best way to do something, the strategies, the tips, the tricks, or whatever. Is it best for me to do a podcast or to do a summit or to have an office, not have an office, to do online or in person? All of these getting in the weeds questions that don't mean shit. I need a better logo. I need to hire a logo. I don't even have a logo. I've been doing this 10 years. Okay. I need, a better homepage. I need my glamour shots. Really? Do you think you need glamour shots? Open your damn phone and take a picture of yourself and stick it on your website. You don't need shit. What matters is this. And this is my opinion, Eric, but the way that I built my business, and I'm very grateful that I was inspired by people to do it this way, was not about Seth. It was about the people I was trying to serve. So what I did is I took a 50-cent journal and made a vision journal where I envisioned my ideal client, my ideal day, what it's like when I'm working with a kid or a family and I get it done working with them and I feel on fire and I've just had so much fun. I'm getting in my car, I'm smiling ear to ear because it was so like, what are those things that give me the feeling where I'm in flow, where I'm doing work that matters to people and where I'm of service to others, not of service to Seth. Right. This is the irony of it. Doesn't matter how you do it. If you do a talk to 1,000 people, if you work with one, all that stuff doesn't matter. Start with service, who you want to serve and how you want to feel when you're serving them. Who you want to serve and how you want to feel when you're serving them. You want to feel connected. You want to feel happy. You want to feel at peace. You want to feel like you're being helpful. All those things, write it down and be real thorough. And then you entrepreneurs, whatever you start, whatever projects you start, be willing to let them be a complete shit show and a complete mess because it'll get better the next time and you'll learn. But come from a spirit of service from your heart, from who you are. And if you think this is cheesy, just humor yourself for a second and say, perhaps I was put here to do some important work on this planet. And maybe I wasn't, quote, put here. Maybe I'm just here and this is all chaos, but I am here and I have an opportunity to pull my head out of my ass and do things for other humans because I have specific things, passions, and skills that can help other human beings. And just do something. Stop trying to figure it all out. That's not where it's at. Stop trying to figure out the logo and the blah, blah, blah. Just help people. And then charge them for it. That is not, it took me a long time to get my money story right. Money is just resources. There's nothing wrong with helping people and charging for it. And if they don't like it, give them their money back. But don't get stuck with the money story and this and that. Just, you want to live a good life and you want to help people.
Seth Perler, you can find more information about him at sethperler.com, Perler. We'll have a link to his website on our show notes. Seth, this was a fun conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks for what you do, buddy.
You bet. This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening, and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is ADHDrewired.com. You can find summaries and additional resources for each episode. You can apply to our free and secret Facebook community. You can learn more about ADHD Rewired's intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups, and sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content you won't get anywhere else. It's all at ADHDrewired.com. While you're there, click the Patreon button. If you're a regular listener and you're still listening to my voice, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron through our Patreon page. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to listeners, but it is not free to produce. And patrons get really cool perks. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHDrewired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. You can also subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube. And you can subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube and see select interviews and some other videos I've posted. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends and your family and your clients, as well as your coaches, therapists, and doctors. And if you're a coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader, and you would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at my website, ADHDrewired.com. And if you're a member of CHAD or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this podcast. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. You know, you might be the person that turns somebody on to a podcast for the very first time. And if you really love this episode, please consider hitting share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I count on you to help me spread the message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and to help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or any other podcast app that accepts ratings and reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe on this podcast on your podcast app so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/ADHD Rewired. Not sure where to start? In no particular order. Check out Atomic Habits by James Clear, The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, 10% Happier, and Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. These are both by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions and Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Vaden. The Four Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. Do you have trouble asking for help? Listen to The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. It's one of the best produced audiobooks I've ever heard. If you're looking for something a little bit more, say, magical, I unexpectedly fell in love with the Harry Potter series. And I don't usually listen to those kinds of books, and I loved it. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brené Brown bus yet, check out Brené Brown's books, starting with The Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, The Power of Vulnerability, And if you're an entrepreneur or leader in any capacity, check out her 2018 book, Dare to Lead. And Brene still is my most wanted guest, so if you know Brene, and you would be so kind to make that connection for me, I would be really, really grateful. You know who else I would like to have on the show? You. Click the podcast tab at ADHDrewired.com and then click the Be a Guest button at the top of that page and schedule a 15-minute pre-interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, keep growing, and keep connecting. Self-care is not selfish, and no matter what gets done or doesn't get done, at the end of the day, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.